Now that's more like it. Not only did I enjoy this week's episode of The Flash, but I actually thought it probably was the best episode yet. And if you remember my vlog from last week, all two people who watch my channel, and all two people who comment on it, well, maybe that's overselling it a bit. I digress. What I said last week was I thought that episode was good, but it just had some major flaws, namely in terms of characterization. But this episode not only fixed some of the problems I had with last week's episode, but also, again, it even soared past the pilot. It has fixed some problems that I think were present in the pilot. Now, granted, when I say that this is the best episode yet, that's not really saying a whole lot, I realize, considering it's only episode number 3. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Now, basically, there's a new metahuman on the loose. I don't really know his comic book name. I mean, really, all we get is the Mist. So I don't know if that's the name of his comic book counterpart. I don't know. I'm not really well versed in the rogues gallery of the Flash, or if this guy is even one of Flash's rogues anyway. Because I know these writers have a tendency to incorporate other heroes' villains into their shows. For example, Deathstroke and the Dollmaker, I believe, were Batman villains. But again, I could be wrong on that too. I'm not an avid reader of comic books, but I'm familiar with several of the characters. Again, I digress. This episode of The Flash dealt with the Mist, as I'm going to call him. He can basically turn his body. He can basically change his body's molecular structure. He was undergoing an execution at the time of the particle explosion, and yeah, like he said, he has the ability to turn himself into this poison gas and basically travel into his victims and kill them. So a pretty dangerous foe, and not really someone that Barry can punch, or at least not right away. I don't really know if I'm giving anything away by saying that, but yeah, in addition to that, we also get some insight into, the details behind the particle accelerator explosion, namely in the form of Caitlin Snow's fiance, Ronnie, who's played by Robbie Amell. I don't know if there was any kind of nepotism going on there, or favoritism, because I don't know if Stephen Amell had any say in the casting of his cousin, but I don't know. It remains to be seen how Robbie Amell will do as Firestorm. But as just plain old Ronnie, I thought he did a good job. Apparently it's not like the Hemsworth brothers, where Chris Hemsworth is awesome and Liam Hemsworth is, lame. Uh, but again, getting back to this week's episode of The Flash, and how it fixed some of the problems I had. The characterization and the relationship between Barry and Joe West, I actually thought was really well handled this time around, because again we've got the groundwork laid, and Joe West is really not really he's not trying to lecture Barry on subjects that are well beyond his comprehension, like I felt he was last time. And that's actually why I didn't like their very hostile relationship in last week's episode. But in this week's episode, he's actually giving him valuable advice that could be applied, or should I say, could be especially applied, more so than what this could normally be applied to, which is, you can't save everybody. I mean, as a cop, Joe West would know this. You can't save everybody. You always carry that around with you. What if I had done this? What if I had done that? And he tells Barry, don't let this guilt drag you down. You move on, and I actually thought that was a really potent message. And considering the Flash is seen at this point anyway as this sort of guardian angel, this red streak who can do anything, and applying the concept of not being able to save everyone he wants, I actually thought was a pretty interesting way to look at it, especially considering that little statistic that Joe threw at him. Like, for every person you save, there's going to be one person that you can't save, or something like that. And it was interesting to see, because, like I said, considering considering Barry has these powers of super speed, you would think that it would make saving people a lot easier. But again, even someone as fast as him can't be everywhere at once. So I would love to see them expand on that idea of, not being able to save everyone. Because even the fastest man alive can't be everywhere at once. And I like how this episode tackled that. And again, I like how they didn't forget about, the stamina issue that was prevalent in the last episode. Like Barry eats a whole load of popcorn and something else sizable. I forget what it was. And then he goes and stops in a car chase. He goes and stops a car chase, and then he comes back before Iris even knows what's going on. And he's like, "Can we get something to eat? I'm starving." And she's like, "Seriously? I mean, how are you not fat by now?" And he's like, "Well, I've been jogging," which yeah, I like how they didn't forget about that. Whether or not they will play any kind of future hindrance to his abilities and cause him problems in balancing out his dual identities, I don't know. I don't really know how supportive Joe is going to be in supporting his two identities, but or that was redundant. What can I say? I'm tired. But like I said, in addition, another thing that they improved on was, I think, the villain. The villain, I still don't really think he was a quote. I don't really think the villain this time around was anything to really write home about, but he was the most threatening villain thus far, or at least when we're talking about episodic villains, because really the episodic villains up to this point haven't really been very good. Because we had the Weather Wizard and Multiplex, who I felt were both disappointments. And the Mist in this episode, I mean, he's at least kind of creepy in his deliveries, and at least he's got a kind of a creepy design going on. He was more distinctive. I'll give him that. He was more distinctive and less, forgettable than the other two villains. But yeah, again, I think they're really going to have to step it up with the villains, and I'm not just saying that because I didn't enjoy these three villains. Of course, there is room for improvement considering we're only just starting season 1. But yeah, and I'm not just saying that because the Flash. I'm not familiar with the Flash's rogues gallery. I'm always abiding by Gene Siskel's assertion. I think it was in his North review. His and Ebert's review of North is like, any concept can be done well, and by extension, I think any character, or almost any character, can be done well to a certain extent. Although if I'm really getting technical about it, I don't really think you can go as many places with someone like the Calendar Man as you can with someone like the Joker. But despite that, I do think they could make these villains a little bit more memorable, and I think some of that has to do with the fact that they're really still kind of establishing the central relationships. Speaking of which, one thing I really liked is the introduction of Caitlin's fiance via flashback. I don't know if the flashbacks are going to be a regular thing on this show like they are on Arrow. I don't really know how they can sustain flashbacks like they have been doing on Arrow, considering there's not really any kind of framed backstory like there is on Arrow, at the island and the 5 years beforehand. So again, I digress, but I liked Caitlin Snow getting a little bit of depth this time around. We really got some insight into her character, and even then they found a way to tie that in with the acts of heroism and the concept of being a hero. Because we learned that Ronnie had actually closed himself and the reactor inside these doors to prevent the explosion from affecting anyone in the lab. So in essence, I mean, everyone was like, your fiance was a hero, and she's like, I didn't want him to be a hero. I wanted him to be my husband. And I actually thought that was a really potent sentence. And along with everyone else in the show, Grant Gustin, Tom Cavanaugh, John Wesley Shipp, Jesse L. Martin, Danielle Panabaker really got a chance to shine this time around in a way that she didn't necessarily get to in the first 2 episodes. So well done. And even the pacing I thought was improved. I think this episode was better paced than the previous 2. I think it really got to take its time a little bit more. And And yeah, the action scenes I actually thought were more creative than the action scenes involving multiplex, which you wouldn't think so. Um, you wouldn't think the action scenes. I would enjoy the action scenes with who is essentially a guy who is essentially a living fart, more than I would enjoy the action scenes involving someone who can duplicate himself. But again, I like how they creatively found a way for Barry to win, and I like how they're really strategizing these battles, albeit in the thick of the battles. But I like how they're really coming up with strategic ways to take out these metahumans. So yeah, I thought this episode of The Flash was vastly improved over the previous one. I'm still interested to see where the show's going to go, and we're going to have a somewhat of a crossover, but not really, in next week's episode with the addition of Felicity Smoke. So yeah, I'm sticking with the show. In my opinion, it's still going strong.